morning. This meeting of the Senate Judiciary Committee will come to order. Before taking up the agenda, I want to acknowledge Brian Palmer. Brian, would you raise your hand? Brian's here every day and has got an announcement to make that he is moving to Minneapolis. I think Senator Klobuchar finally got to him, and he's going to be closer to his family. He's really put in the hours in getting these hearings prepared and ready to go, tackling the tough challenges sometimes of the equipment before us, facing this pandemic himself and what it's meant to his work schedule. And I just want to thank him for all that he's done for the committee and wish him the very best in his next undertaking. Brian, thanks a lot. We have 5 nominees, 5 bills. The nominees have been listed for the first time and will be held over. They are Nancy Abudu for the 11th Circuit, Judge Michelle Childs for the D.C. Circuit, Judge Anna D'Alba for the Eastern District of California, Nusrat Chaudhry for the Eastern District of New York, and Natasha Murrell for the Eastern District of New York. We also have on our agenda 5 bipartisan bills in honor of Police Week. S. 3635, the Public Safety Officer Support Act of 2022, will be held over, and we will turn to the remaining bills after brief remarks from myself and the ranking member, Senator Grassley. In 1962, President Kennedy signed a law authorizing the President to designate May 15th as Peace Officers Memorial Day, and the week in which it falls is Police Week. This is a critically important week to honor the men and women who serve in law enforcement across America and bravely protect us, and particularly to honor those who have fallen in the line of duty. Being a police officer has always been a challenge, but it's particularly tough these last few years. Officers on the beat continue to confront the challenges of pandemic and the spikes in shootings that communities all around the country are experiencing. We know gun violence is the #1 cause of police officer killings in the line of duty. I will never forget the funeral service for Chicago police officer Ella French, who was murdered last year during a routine traffic stop by an armed attacker with a straw purchase gun. My wife and I went to Rita High School, where the chapel was dedicated for a memorial service for her. I just want to let you know that image of blocks and blocks of uniformed police from all different types of police departments, large and small, and of course the Chicago Police Department, standing in uniform and waiting, some for hours, to pay their respects, is an image that will never escape me. It'll be with me forever, and I want to make sure that I always remember that when I speak about the sacrifices that are made by officers in the line of duty. I have spoken to her mother several times since the incident, and her mom has said, I just hope that her life will be remembered and will make a difference. And I hope that what we do in this committee will be a tribute to her and all of the fallen officers. In the coming weeks, this committee will hold a hearing to examine the threats law enforcement officers face from these violent attacks. She was killed with a straw purchase gun. Somebody went into a gun store with a clean record, bought a gun, handed it over to a convicted felon who killed her. Just that basic. That straw purchases are not bookkeeping issues. They are life and death issues, and the loss of that wonderful officer is proof of it. Police departments and sheriff's offices also face incredible challenges with recruitment, retention, high turnover, burnout, and fatigue. These challenges have led to another serious problem. I got on a phone call, Zoom call this week with a half dozen sheriffs and chiefs of police from across Illinois for an off-the-record impromptu discussion of the challenges they're facing. They made it clear that one of the major challenges that they worry about is losing these law enforcement officers to suicide. It was a sobering conversation of what they're living through. In the city of Chicago, we have one of the highest rates of police officer suicide in America, 60% above the national average. This Police Week, we're working to address these challenges. We have on our agenda bipartisan bills to provide law enforcement and their families more support for mental health and help make sure officers have the resources and training to do their jobs safely and effectively. Let me be clear, effective law enforcement is critical to ensuring public safety, but law enforcement alone will not solve the problems that they face. We can only create safe communities by investing in those communities as well. We can and must address the root causes of crime by addressing poverty that leads to desperation and misguided choices. We also have to address the issue of trauma. A 16-year-old in gangland fashion killed a 15-year-old 2 weeks ago in Chicago. When you looked at his background, at the age of 2, his mother was convicted for killing his father, and she's still in prison. This young boy has gone back and forth from foster care, back and forth to different families, and unfortunately found a home with the gangs. And at 16, he has a rap sheet, which is just, it's terrible to imagine. But those are real life circumstances that we can't ignore. Safe communities are communities where people have access to good jobs, pay a living wage, quality education, safe and affordable housing, health care, and counseling, which is a critical element necessary in many of our schools. We must deploy proven crime prevention strategies such as trauma-informed care, community violence intervention, and safe passage to school. Finally, we must continue the work of restoring trust between law enforcement and communities. As I've said repeatedly, the vast majority of police officers are good people doing their very best in a difficult, dangerous job. They confront situations most of us cannot imagine. We also know we are asking our police officers to do much, taking on the role of first responders in a crisis where mental health professionals often would be more appropriate. Speaking to the chiefs this week, one gave me an example. He said, one of my officers was trying to revive a 3-year-old boy who stopped breathing with CPR. He lost him. He turned around. His next assignment was a naloxone administration of a fellow whose life he saved, who came around, became conscious, and turned violent against the police who had saved his life. That is the reality of a day's work in many police departments. There have been broad bipartisan calls for police reform. I want to thank Senator Booker for his leadership on this issue and his patient determination to find good policy reforms, to build trust and make our system of law enforcement work better. If we're willing to roll up our sleeves and set aside partisanship, we can get this done. I'm thankful for all of the efforts on this committee, but especially Senator Booker. I wanted to single him out for the hard work he put in. This police week, we're not going to solve all the challenges at once, but let's do those things we can achieve, those bipartisan steps to support law enforcement. I now turn to Senator Grassley for opening remarks.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to start by telling my colleagues on this committee our rationale on this side for asking for a second hearing on Ms. Chowdhury for the Eastern District of New York, because it's very unusual for maybe to even ask, but it'd be even more unusual for a nominee to come back for a second hearing. But I'd like to explain to my colleagues a good reason to have that happen here. At her hearing, she was asking whether she'd said that police killing unarmed black men is something that, quote, happens every day in the United States, end of quote. She initially said that she wasn't sure if she had said it, but later when asked if the statement was true, she stated 3 times that she said it in her role as an advocate. Law enforcement groups opposed her nomination because of her testimony, including Fraternal Order of Police, National Sheriff's Association, the New York Police Department Sergeants Benevolent Association, and the United Coalition of Public Safety. She sent a letter 2 weeks after her hearing saying that she never made this statement, but the letter doesn't explain the extremely conflicting testimonies that she gave at the hearing. It doesn't explain why she refused to acknowledge that the statement is blatantly false and has no basis in fact. That gives us serious concern that this is a major case of confirmation conversion. This isn't just a case where she misspoke and her letter clarifies what she meant. It directly conflicts. The only way of addressing this is for her to come back for another hearing. That brings me to the business of this week. Joining this markup as my guests are Heidi and Ladd Paulson. Ladd is a Marine and former police officer from the city of Billings and Heidi is his devoted and tireless wife who works with the Wounded Blue. Heidi, through the Wounded Blue, worked tirelessly to get legislation across the finish line last year. I thank you both for your service. I want to thank the chairman for holding this Police Week markup to honor law enforcement officers and first responders. This is an important tradition. Last year, there was some doubt about whether we would even have a Police Week markup. I thank the chairman for having a markup last year when the climate in his party wasn't so friendly to law enforcement. This year, the atmosphere is very different. President Biden says he will fund the police, and Democrats are willing to follow suit. We haven't completely turned the corner when it comes to working together to protect the police. Intentional killings of police have reached a horrifying 20-year high. Ambush attacks on police, where the attacker targets an officer just because they are an officer, that rose 115% last year. Even Attorney General Garland admitted that police have become targets for violence. But if you ask President Biden, this is just another reason for gun control. Violence against police, the 30% spike in murders, both started the first week of June 2020, when the country broke out into nationwide anti-police riots. President Biden attributes them both to the legal sale of firearms. I believe the chairman has indicated that he is willing to hold a hearing on attacks on police, a hearing which I requested. I appreciate that very much for the chairman to do that and look forward to a productive hearing. But this hearing won't be productive if it's just another forum for partisan gun control and not a real opportunity to discuss what is causing this spike in targeted violence against police. Now, getting to the legislation, two of the bipartisan bills that I requested be considered for this markup couldn't be considered because the president's false narrative. We can't consider a bill I worked on with law enforcement groups that would gather more information about attacks on police. This bill might upset some who don't want to know what is causing this violence. And we can't consider a bill that would allow officers to purchase their service weapon rather than waste them, because if we even say the word gun, it must immediately be paired with gun control. This is also true when we talk about domestic extremism or helping the dangerously mentally ill. I think that's a terrible shame that we have this environment in our legislative process. For years, Representative Deutsch from Parkland and I have been asking or even pleading to pass the Eagles Act. So have 40 states' attorney generals asked for the same legislation, and also countless victims' families. This bill would allow schools and other venues to receive voluntary training from Secret Service about recognizing a person in need of intervention before they engage in mass violence. Time after time, we see the shooters give multiple predictable warning signs before an attack. We see this pattern again, like we did in Parkland with the killer there, with the 18-year-old shooter in Buffalo just this last weekend. This bipartisan bill is yet something that could have made a difference. It gets no closer to passage. I'm going to support the bills that we're marking up today, fighting PTSD, which I'm leading with Senator Coons, Invest to Protect, which I joined with Senator Cortez Masto, and bills with Senators Cornyn, Whitehouse, and Peters. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Grassley. So let's move to your bill, S4007, the Fighting Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder Act of 2022, co-sponsored or joint sponsored by Senator Coons, Senator Feinstein, Blumenthal, Hawley, and Kennedy, and I ask consent to add myself as a co-sponsor. This bipartisan bill directs the Attorney General and the COPS Office to propose programs to provide evidence-based trauma-informed care and support for public safety officers and 9/11 dispatchers to help treat and prevent job-related post-traumatic stress disorder or acute stress disorder. It requires the Attorney General to consult with relevant stakeholders in preparing the report. I understand there is a bipartisan manager's amendment characterized as DUN 22453, which I will now call up. Is there any objection to the adoption of the bipartisan manager's amendment? Without objection, the manager's amendment will be adopted. Senator Grassley or Coons, would you like to speak further about the bill?
I only want to suggest letters be put in the record from the International Association of Fire Chiefs, the Major Cities Chiefs Association, and the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And we also have the support of this bill from the Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association, Major County Sheriffs of America, and the Sergeants Benevolent Association, New York PD.
Without objection, so ordered. Senator Coons, would you like to speak to the bill?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm grateful for the opportunity to work with my friend and colleague, Senator Grassley of Iowa, on this bill, and I appreciate our holding this bill markup during National Police Week. Common sense and bipartisan bills like the ones listed today support law enforcement, the communities they serve, and continue to make progress for all of us. The particular bill that I'm speaking to now addresses the critical issue of post-traumatic stress disorder in law enforcement. Our law enforcement officers are regularly exposed to trauma, whether from hours of having to review child sexual abuse material, if that happens to be their role in an agency, or from the day-to-day response to calls that, as you just said, Mr. Chairman, can expose them to life or death moments at any time. This trauma and the possibility of acute post-traumatic stress harms officers to a degree that suicide is now one of the highest causes of law enforcement deaths. It harms their families, it can impact their communities and their decision-making, and we have a lot more to do to remove the stigma of law enforcement seeking help. And we also have to deal with the challenge of how to best provide mental health support to officers who serve disaggregated across 18,000 agencies nationwide. Many of us have been involved in trying to address PTSD in our armed forces. That is much easier because there's a unitary chain of command, there's a unitary source of the provision of health care. That's not the case with law enforcement. I look forward to seeing the product and the outcome of the enactment of this bill. One last point, if I could. I'm proud that my home state is leading on finding solutions. The Delaware State Police launched a forward-thinking, creative online app to help its officers access service from their smartphones to connect them to confidential counseling services. This bill would ask DOJ to propose how we in Congress can support similar innovation nationwide. The Senate Law Enforcement Caucus, of which I'm the co-chair with Senator Blunt, is holding its next event next month on this issue at the Law Enforcement Memorial. And I look forward to working with all of you in a bipartisan way to pass this and other bills today. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Coons. Does any senator seek recognition or wish to offer an amendment?
Mr. Chairman.
I believe Senator Booker and Senator Padilla seek recognition. Senator Booker.
Yeah, I have been expressing a lot of misgivings and frustrations throughout this process, and I understand that there's efforts to keep any amendments off of these bills. It is frustrating to me because I know there's a lot of folks here who've had experience with law enforcement. I have literally spent hundreds and hundreds of hours in police cars driving around with officers. I was a mayor of a big city and became mayor at a time that violent crime was spiking. And dealing with my officers, you see the hell they go through trying to deal with and combat violence in America. And when you see the experiences of these officers who often run into shootings with no situational awareness to help protect people, you see the trauma it brings to their families. You see the fear that they have knowing the weaponry that are out there amassed and arrayed against them. I've had good experiences as a senator, none better than working with the FOP and the IACP on common sense, things that we should and could be doing to protect our officers and keep our streets safer. And so I agree with, I listen very closely to Ranking Member Grassley's comments. Some of them in his introductories I disagree with, this idea that last year was a climate not friendly to law enforcement officers because it's somehow Democrats. I disagree with, but I agree with this opportunity to discuss these issues. So here we have an Officer PTSD Act, and the FOP has been trying for years to get more expansive data collected for suicides. And that's not a part of this bill? That's ridiculous to me. That the people that actually represent the majority of police officers that have tried time and time again to get more expansive collections, I have an amendment on that. I'd like to offer it, but I'll withdraw it if there's an agreement between the ranking and the chairman not to allow amendments on this bill. But God, if this is something police officers are asking for, why not include it? Number two that I'd like to include in this bill is the real fear of American law enforcement officers on armor-piercing bullets. They call these cop killers. And so we have a modest amendment to deal with a lot of the fear and anxiety about these weapons that simply allow the ATF to investigate these cop killer bullets. And so I'm very frustrated. My childhood best friend, a guy named Chris Cheevers, just recently committed suicide. He's an officer in a small town in New Jersey. And so here we have rushing through legislation that could be made better, that could do more to protect officers, that's in line with things that they have expressed, but somehow we're blocking amendments today that really frustrates me. And so what I would ask is fine if this is going through, and today we have an agreement to block amendments, that at least before this comes to the floor, can the sponsors of this amendment sit down and work with me, talk to law enforcement more, and support amendments that are going to really protect officers and add extensive more work and data collection so we can better protect officers like people I know and love who've taken their lives.
If that's a question to me, Senator Booker, at least on the subject of suicide, I'd be glad to have that discussion with you.
I'm happy to facilitate any discussion, and I'd like to bring it before the committee. I've spoken to Senator Booker personally. I thank him for his cooperation, and it is frustrating. I'm frustrated as you are. This is my first opportunity to chair what I consider to be one of the most important committee assignments in the Senate, if not Congress. And this is the forum to discuss the issues that you've raised. What we are trying to do is to accept the political reality of what we face at this moment in our nation's history and what we face in the Senate with a 50-50 split, and whether or not we can come up with anything bipartisan that'll make it through this committee and the floor. I won't quote the groups, but major law enforcement groups have said to move forward without amendments if you can. And so I'm trying to serve both purposes. Do something productive and constructive. Don't get it mired down in partisanship that ends up stopping the process completely. If you have something that has value of its own, and I believe this bill, Senator Grassley, Senator Coons does. But I do not quarrel with your premise that there should be an opportunity in this committee, a forum to discuss other aspects of law enforcement and law and order and improving law enforcement. And I will say to you, I pledge that I will give you that opportunity. And we should have it soon because these issues are timely and important. Anyone else seek recognition? Senator Padilla.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And very, very briefly, number one, I want to associate myself with Senator Booker's comments, sentiments, and frustration. Not a specific data point, but on the topic of the prevalence of officers dying by suicide, to underscore the need for this bill and more. So I'd love to be part of the conversations. I hope it's not new information for members of the committee and staff and anybody watching at home, but if it is, then good. It's been several years now several years, that there are more law enforcement officers who die by suicide on an annual basis than in the line of duty. Think about that. More officers lost to suicide than in the line of duty. That's just one of the tragic indicators, one of the tragic data points to underscore the need for, again, this bill and so much more. But we need more than just the top-line data. We need more granular data to help us, help those who protect us. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Senator Padilla. Senator Tillis.
Mr. Chair, thank you, and thank you for the work on, particularly during Police Week, for us to move forward with bipartisan bills and demonstrate that we have bipartisan support for law enforcement, and I believe in my heart of hearts that we do in this committee and I think in the Senate. You know, I am sympathetic to many of the issues that Senator Booker raised and would look forward to working on getting things done, not waiting till next year's Police Week, but getting things done. But I do think that we have to be careful. Today we have the opportunity to do voice votes and speak with one voice on meaningful pieces of legislation. And I did want to submit for the record the letter that you and Ranking Member Grassley received from several law enforcement agencies saying that they were encouraging voting no on amendments that they would generally, many of them would generally support, but they really do want to see the good that we could pass out of this committee today and not delay it in pursuit of the perfect. But I am more than willing to work with members on this committee on suicide, on officer safety, and a number of other things that we need to continue to work on. And without objection.
Without objection, the letter will be entered in the record. Senator Coons.
Briefly, as a co-sponsor of this first bill, I just want to say how much I appreciate and respect the sincerity, the integrity, the persistence of my colleague from New Jersey's work on this. And I'm eager to work with him to address and resolve any data collection opportunity we have that can expand the positive reach and impact of this bill. Thank you.
Anyone else seek recognition? If not, on favorably reporting S4007, fighting post-traumatic stress disorder, as amended with bipartisan manager's amendment, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. The bill will be favorably reported to the floor. The next bill is another one that Senator Grassley is co-sponsoring with Senator Cortez Masto, 3860, the Invest to Protect Act of 2022. Other sponsors include Senators Tillis, Coons, Klobuchar, and I ask consent to be added as a sponsor. Bipartisan bill providing $250 million in grants over 5 years through the COPS office to support smaller law enforcement agencies. The grant funds can be used to invest in de-escalation training, domestic violence training, officer safety, equipment, mental health support, recruitment, and retention. I understand there's a manager's amendment characterized as DUN 22492, which I'll now call up. And is there any objection to the adoption of that manager's amendment? Without objection, it will be adopted. Senator Grassley, would you like to speak to the bill?
Only for the purpose of putting letters in of support from the Fraternal Order of Police, National Association of Police Organizations, the Peace Officers Research Association of California. The bill is also supported by the National Sheriff's Association, and this legislation is directed particularly to help very small law enforcement agencies across the country to invest in the proper equipment and services that it takes to deliver their work.
Senator seeking recognition, Senator Blumenthal. Without objection, Senator Blumenthal will be added as a co-sponsor. Does anyone else seek recognition? If not, we will vote on final passage.
I'm sorry, I seek recognition as well.
Senator Booker.
And again, this is the same situation, and I've tried to work with both the Republican and Democratic sponsors. Thought we had an agreement about this. Everything that Senator Grassley said is, and I agree with. But I also know, having worked intimately with police departments, that there are certain practices we should be investing in that keep our officers and citizens more safe. We expressed some clarification in the language. We thought we had it, but that's been now walked back. And so again, I am not going to offer an amendment. I think that Senator Tillis's comments about the importance of speaking with a bipartisan voice vote, but I ask, if not plea, with my friend Senator Grassley. We thought we had Senator Cortez Masto agreeing to the language, that I just ask for the willingness to work with us before this bill gets to the floor to try to clarify the language so we can get the ambitious and laudatory aims that were just expressed by the ranking member, so that we can have a bill that really will add to safety and security. And I'm glad that the ranking member's getting a whisper from a bald man, because we usually are wiser than those with hair.
Senator Grassley, would you like to respond?
The answer is yes, we will try to work something out for you.
Sir, you are one of the more honorable people I've worked with. That is enough for me. Let's get to the voice vote.
If no one else seeks,
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Cornyn, of course.
I hope we can get through all of these bills with unanimous support of the committee, but I think it's important to recall that we had an opportunity back in June of 2020 to vote on a police reform bill, but it was blocked by a unanimous vote of our Democratic colleagues. There was an offer to allow amendments, an open amendment process, but all of our colleagues across the aisle blocked the bill that was primarily led by Senator Tim Scott. So I think we just have to be consistent in terms of our position that we actually want to get to the bottom of some of these problems and try to achieve consensus. We can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Building consensus is hard work, but I just think we need to remember our history here and the context in which some of these conversations are occurring. I understand our friend from New Jersey's frustration. This is a frustrating process by design. It forces us to do the hard work of building consensus and seek the art of the possible, as opposed to everything we want. So thank you for giving me a chance just to mention that. We've had plenty of opportunities which we have not availed ourselves of to deal with some of these issues, and I think that's an important matter to note. Thank you.
Senator Cornyn, I would just add that I joined peripherally with Senator Booker and Senator Scott after that event to try to find if we could reach a bipartisan agreement on this approach. There was a lot of hours went into that, more than I put into it, Senator Booker and Senator Tim Scott. I think a good faith effort did not result in a bill, but I hope it resumes at some point. It's important that we have bipartisanship in this effort. Is there anything you'd like to add, Senator Booker?
I think you summed up what I would want to say.
So if there's no one else seeking recognition on favorably reporting the S3860 Invest to Protect 2022, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The majority of the members present having voted in the affirmative, the ayes have it. The bill will be favorably reported to the floor. S2151, Strong Communities Act, sponsored by Senator Cornyn on the committee and Senator Peters, co-sponsored by Senator Tillis and Klobuchar, and I ask consent to be added as co-sponsor. This bipartisan bill would boost community policing by strengthening recruitment from within communities themselves, provides COPS grant funds can be used for local law enforcement recruits to attend law enforcement training programs if the recruits agree to serve in the precincts where the recruits live. I understand there's a manager's amendment characterized as SIL 22693, which I'll now call. Is there any objection to the adoption of the manager's amendment? Senator Klobuchar, do you object? Yes. Without objection, then the manager's amendment will be adopted. Senator Cornyn will be recognized first, and then Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just by way of clarification, the manager's amendment makes this critical funding available for current law enforcement officers, not just recruits. The rationale being that we want to retain the good officers that we have and help train up a new generation of recruits. Also, the amendment expands the geographic region for law enforcement officers that would qualify. And finally, it expands the availability for funding to officers serving in rural communities, which are typically places that don't have a tax base that would support the sort of resources that law enforcement organizations in more urban and suburban areas would have. I want to thank Senator Peters and Senator Klobuchar for working, and Senator Tillis for working with us on this bill to promote a stronger relationship between local law enforcement and the communities they protect. This bill would provide federal grants for local law enforcement recruits who agree to serve in these communities that need police officers. These grants would help cover the cost of training at the local college or academy. It would give states the flexibility to use Department of Justice Community-Oriented Policing Service Program grants, known as the COPS program, to attract local members of the community to serve in law enforcement. Of course, the purpose is to promote good policing and relationship building between our law enforcement officials and communities they serve. And in the wake of the George Floyd killing, I held roundtables in Dallas and Houston, and one of the things that stood out the most is the lack of trust between law enforcement and some of the communities they serve, and hopefully this bill will help mitigate some of that lack of trust and be a positive contribution. We know that police officers that come from the neighborhoods where they work have a deeper understanding of the community's needs as well as the dangers that the community faces. So as our nation commemorates National Police Week, it's important we provide law enforcement the flexibility and the resources they need to strengthen those relationships between the communities they serve and our men and women in blue. Senator Peters and I are proud to have a significant group of stakeholders, including the Fraternal Order of Police, support this bill, and I believe Senator Tillis introduced by unanimous consent a letter which pertains to this bill and the other bills that we're going to be considering today. So I hope we'll swiftly pass this legislation, and I want to thank my colleagues for working with us, working with me to get this across the finish line. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Cornyn. In order of recognition, Senator Klobuchar, and then Senator Leahy.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you, Senator Cornyn, for working on this bill with us. I wanted to note that there is another bill that I know we're working with the chairman and the ranking members on that Senator Murkowski and I have done for years now, the reauthorization of the COPS program. We're also working with Senator Graham. And while that bipartisan bill wasn't included on this list today, and we would like to see it included very soon so that we can get that bill through as well. I wanted to note how important this bill is, the COP Strong Communities Act bill, because I think every one of us knows in our state that we don't have enough police officers in so many of our police departments. Many of these bills are aimed at that for various reasons, from mental health issues with our police to small rural departments. And we know it right here in the Capitol, where we have been slowly but surely building up our force again, but lost a number of people after January 6th who retired. We have significantly less officers than we should, and we need to recruit people into law enforcement. And that means a lot of things, including respect for our police officers. It means salaries, benefits, the right equipment, which we know they didn't have on January 6th right here in this building when their equipment was locked in a bus and they couldn't access it. And so it means a lot of things. But what I love about this bill is it focuses on recruitment, but also retention and rewarding officers who stay with the hard work, the difficult work. So I want to thank you, Senator Cornyn, and look forward to getting this bill over the finish line. And Chair and Ranking also look forward to getting the Klobuchar-Murkowski COPS reauthorization bill before this committee with Senator Graham. Thank you.
Senator Leahy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with what's been said by my colleagues. I was glad that I was able to put a lot more money for the police in the last supplemental, but we all know there's going to be more.
Thank you for that, Senator Leahy.
No, I know. Listen, that was we had bipartisan support for that, and I appreciate it. I attended the National Peace Officers Memorial Service this past Sunday. I've done that probably a couple dozen times since I've been here, and I was proud to be the senator at it. As a former prosecutor, I know well the daily sacrifices and bravery. And this will be my last police week as a U.S. Senator on that, but I do want to reaffirm my deep appreciation for the men and women. With that, Mr. Chair, I would ask consent that each of the bills before us, beginning with S-407, 3860, 2151, 403, 3635, that I be added as a co-sponsor.
Without objection.
And, it's been spoken, I know Senator Cornyn has before too, that we have the, in our large cities, we have the police, but in the rural areas, we have other distinct concerns, and I appreciate what he's done on that, and I appreciate everybody who's worked with me on the Bulletproof Vest Partnership, and I'll put my full statement on the record.
Thank you very much, Senator Leahy. On favorably reporting.
Mr. Chairman, can you add me as a co-sponsor to this?
Senator Booker will be added, of course. Senator Padilla, also added. On favorably reporting S-2151, the Strong Communities Act, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The majority of members present having voted in the affirmative, the ayes have it. The bill will be favorably reported to the floor. Next bill is S-4003, Law Enforcement De-escalation Training Act of 2022, co-sponsored by committee members Cornyn and Whitehouse, as well as Senator Coons, Klobuchar, Tillis, Feinstein, and Blumenthal, and I ask consent to be added as a co-sponsor without objection. This bipartisan bill provides federal support for local law enforcement to adopt de-escalation training to respond more effectively to people suffering mental or behavioral crises. It requires the Attorney General to develop de-escalation training curricula, authorize $70 million in annual grant funding for that training, and evaluate implementation to improve training outcomes. Understand there's a manager's amendment characterized HEN 22404, which I'll now call up. Is there any objection to the adoption of the manager's amendment? If not, the manager's amendment will be adopted, and Senators Cornyn and Whitehouse will be recognized in that order. Senator Cornyn?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just by way of quick explanation, we worked with our colleagues on the manager's amendment to make 4 changes from its previous version. First, it modifies the authorization of appropriations in response to some of the concerns. The new structure better tailors the authorization of appropriations to the manner in which the program would be rolled out, focusing our spending on developing the curricula and equipping people to train the trainers during the first 2.5 years, and then shifting to training grants to state and local law enforcement in years 3 and 4 once the curricula has been developed and the trainers have been trained. The amendment also responds to technical feedback we've gotten from the Department of Justice. And third, modifies the process by which the DOJ would certify training programs and courses. And finally, the amendment clarifies that civil rights organizations would participate in the process for creating the curricula and designing the reporting requirements and developing guiding priorities for distributing the grant funds. It's a shocking statistic to me, but apparently true, that 6 out of 10 law enforcement encounters in America involve people experiencing a mental health crisis, 6 out of 10. And we know that without this kind of training, that both the individual experiencing the mental health crisis and the officers are in jeopardy. And so this training, I believe, is very important, both to protect the person who is suffering that crisis, but also the law enforcement officials that are called, perhaps in response to a 911 call. I want to thank Senator Whitehouse for his partnership on this bill, along with Senator Coons, Klobuchar, Tillis, Feinstein, and Blumenthal. Obviously, here again, we're celebrating National Police Week, and again, this just provides the resources like the other bills that we've talked about to help them do their jobs as safely and as effectively as possible. Finally, the Law Enforcement De-escalation Training Act of 2022 would create a new dedicated funding stream within the existing Burn Memorial Justice Assistance Grant Program, as well as mental health professionals working with those officers in these de-escalation techniques. Let me offer the rest of my statement for the record, if I may, and I'll turn it over to my colleague, our colleague, Senator Whitehouse.
Without objection, the remainder of your remarks will be entered into the record. I'd just like to add, before recognizing Senator Whitehouse, the chair would add, the city of Chicago, in considering social workers and counselors who would respond to these crises, were reminded by both groups and others that they wanted police protection as well. And that's obvious why they would ask for that. But I think it's important that we understand that most of the time this is not to replace, but to supplement the police response.
Yes, if I may, Mr. Chairman, I recently was in Dallas where they have teams, person teams, including the police officer, the social worker, and another individual. And so they go to these scenes where they're called together, and so they can deal with it as appropriately. But it seems to me like an enlightened approach, and one, like I said, that will help protect the individual suffering the mental health crisis as well as the officers. Thank you.
Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm very pleased to have worked with Senator Cornyn on this. This is part of a series of good bills we have done together, so it's nice to see it come to fruition here in the committee. Crisis intervention is an increasingly important part of police work, and de-escalation training is an increasingly important part of crisis intervention. Over the weekend, I met with the Cranston, Rhode Island Police Department crisis intervention folks. That's a department that is led by Chief Michael Winquist, who is a former state police officer and about as squared away a law enforcement police chief as you could possibly get. And his Captain Justin Dutra, who's running the crisis intervention team, is also an extremely squared away law enforcement officer. And their commitment to this program and their excitement about it was very impressive to see. I think from Texas to Rhode Island, we're seeing a lot of the same exposure of our police departments, and they are just eager to have this kind of training, have these new capacities. They've even developed a system where when they get a call to a location, if there have been a history of calls to that location and it appears that there are mental or behavioral health issues related to those calls, that they know that as soon as the call comes in, and they can deploy the specialists as well as the police officers. They are watching to see when there's a safety issue. Sometimes the crisis intervention specialist can actually get in there first before the police even have a chance to arrive, because they deploy that quickly when it looks like it's going to be a safe situation. This is something that they've put a lot of effort and thought into. They're getting really good at it, and to continue to support training and funding in this area, I think, is increasingly important for all of our police departments from Dallas to Cranston. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Senator Whitehouse. Anyone else seek recognition? Senator Cruz.
Mr. Chairman, I just ask consent to be added as a co-sponsor to all four of these, S4007, S3860, S2151, and S4003.
Without objection. Anyone else? Senator Booker.
So first of all, I just want to thank Senator Whitehouse and Senator Cornyn. Their work in this space did not begin as we approached Police Week. They've been working on this for years. We've had some good hearings, in fact, on co-responders in this committee. And a lot of that work, frankly, we incorporated into the bipartisan bill we were working on with Senator Scott that was endorsed, in fact, by the FOP and the IACP. We pushed amendment. We did not have enough time to really engage with Senator Cornyn and Senator Whitehouse. I want to discuss my amendment, then I will withdraw. But it's a very common sense amendment. Most of us who've had experience managing large organizations know that if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Senator Cornyn rightfully points out that we have a problem in America. African Americans are multiple times more likely to be killed by the police, about 4 times more than white Americans. But a mentally ill American has, if I have my data correct, between 10 and 12 times more likely to be killed. When an officer uses force, pulls their weapon, uses a baton, we should be measuring what happens. There should be data that's collected so we can better analyze this. That is a critical part of accountability, is measuring the officer's use of force so we can study it and better understand it. The FBI asks for this, but we do not collect that data uniformly in this country. And it makes our officers less safe, and it makes the community less safe. And so my amendment, which I hope, again, as Senator Grassley is committed to doing and others have, and I'm hoping I can work with the bill sponsors, is to actually improve our data collection so that we can better manage it. And the best example I can give in this committee hearing is that the FBI collects ambush data for police officers. When a police officer is being ambushed, it is one of the scarier things that we're seeing increasingly happen. Well, there's very little participation in the FBI's data collection for us to even understand and study this when it happens. So we are this nation right now where, from officer ambushes to officers' uses of force, we have no national data collection going on for us to better study, manage, and help officers and communities be safer. That's the amendment I would like to offer, an accountability amendment. I am hoping to get a commitment from the bill sponsors that we can discuss that and perhaps consider it for addition before it moves to the floor.
Mr. Chairman, if I'm,
Senator Cornyn?
I'm happy to work with Senator Booker.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Ossoff.
I ask unanimous consent to be added as a co-sponsor on S4007, 3860, 2151, and 4003.
Without objection. Anyone else seek recognition? If not, we'll vote on final passage on favorably reporting S4003, Law Enforcement De-escalation Training Act of 2022. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Majority of members present having voted in the affirmative, the ayes have it. With that, this meeting of the Senate Judiciary, Senator Booker. Without objection, your statement will be entered into the record if there's no further business.
Mr. Chairman, just
Senator
one very
Whitehouse.
brief comment before we go. I think that Senator Booker has done impressive work trying to press these police reform issues forward, and I look forward to continuing to work with him as he does. I think there's a lot of room to make progress in strong bipartisan ways on issues like no-knock warrants, on issues like qualified immunity. I think they're very sensible responses that can take place in those spaces. And we have some, I think, good examples in Rhode Island, and I look forward to continuing that process.
Thank you, Senator Whitehouse. Let me repeat what I said earlier and make it clearer. This Police Week package was an effort to do things in a bipartisan fashion and to make certain that they have a good chance of reaching the floor and being signed into law. But many of the other issues that could and should be raised in this area need to be tackled by this committee, as controversial as it may be. And I pledge to you, Senator Booker, and on the Republican side, that we will have a vehicle and you'll have your chance to offer your amendment, and we'll be debating it here in this committee. That's why we're here.
And I just want to say, working with law enforcement until to this day, they understand that when a lot of Americans, millions of Americans, see more resources going to the police, that there are many communities that are still afraid, that are still worried about police accountability, that are still worried about their own safety. And I'm grateful that members of this committee on both sides of the aisle, as well as law enforcement officers, want to work to address a lot of those legitimate concerns and fears and work on accountability measures. So I'm very grateful for the committee and my friends on both sides who are willing to work with me as these things head to the floor.
With that, this meeting of the Senate Judiciary Committee will stand adjourned.